Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for February 7th, 2025. Today, we're going to start at floodlit.org. Floodlit is a nonprofit organization that documents instances of sex crimes allegedly perpetrated by members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. At the top of the page, it says 4,025 plus reports of SA in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Mormon Church has not published a list of leaders or volunteers convicted of such crimes. However, Floodlit has found 584 offenders in 45 U.S. states and 6 countries. That means that 4,025 cases have been reported and 584 have some sort of legal paperwork involved that Floodlit has been able to track down. If I reported on just one of the offenders every single time I do an update, and I recorded updates every weekday without missing any, I could detail one Mormon offender every weekday for 2 years and 3 months. Today I'm going to go over the 3 most recent. From floodlit.org, February 3rd, 2025, Mark Stevens, a former bishop, has been charged with SA of a 16-year-old girl. February 4th, 2025, Phil Bussey, a former Mormon 70 and mission president, has been accused in a civil lawsuit of helping a convicted abuser, Peyton Bussey, to get removed from 2 offender registries, and later inviting him to Phil's mission in Spain, where Peyton allegedly assaulted a child. February 7th, 2025, breaking new lawsuit against Mormon Church says temple worker assaulted a man during a 1984 anointing ritual in the Los Angeles temple, and the plaintiff was led to believe that the assault was part of his anointing until 2024 when he heard a podcast where ex-Mormons shared similar stories. That last one highlights why it's so important for us as ex or former Mormons to talk about our experiences in the church. There are many things that we were led to believe were normal that were actually non-consensual, coercive, manipulative, and even abusive. This is why it is essential that if we have the energy after we leave the church, that we take the time to not leave it alone. Now let's go to religionnews.com for an article by Jana Reese. She says this coming Sunday, February 9th, as the Kansas City Chiefs battle the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl, many Americans will wager on the game for money. ESPN is reporting legal bets on the game should amount to $1.39 billion, to say nothing of the billions more that will be wagered informally and sometimes illegally. Utah is not one of the 38 states that now permit some form of legal sports betting. In fact, the historically majority Mormon state has no forms of legal gambling at all, not so much as a state lottery. This can be largely attributed to the deep and long-standing influence the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has in the state, where it is headquartered. Even if self-identified Latter-day Saints/Mormons are no longer the majority in Utah state population, their influence runs deep. Breaking away from the article, for me personally, the most memorable Mormon speech on gambling was given by Gordon Hinckley in the priesthood session of General Conference in 2005. I didn't listen to the speech live because I don't have the right male parts for that, but my husband did, and I remember him coming home and telling me that he wouldn't ever gamble again. He wasn't a big gambler previously, but he had a handful of times gone to Vegas with friends, set himself a budget for fun, and enjoyed some time at the roulette table. While listening to the talk, he was thinking it didn't apply to him because he had always stuck to his budget the few times he'd gambled and arguably always left with more than he went in with. But then he heard this statement from Gordon, quote, "One of our young men recently said, pay $5 to see a movie, pay $5 to play poker. It's the same idea. It is not the same idea. In one case, you get something for which you pay. In the other case, only one picks up the winnings and the others are left empty-handed," unquote. I am not a gambler because it makes me way too anxious, but I don't see any issue with the occasional night out with friends in a casino. Like church, it can be about the social aspect more than the actual activity, and those involved, as long as addiction isn't muddying things, can come away with something. Back to the article from Jana Reese. What's interesting is that a growing number of U.S. Latter-day Saints seem to be adopting more of a live and let live approach to the question on gambling. In the 2016 Next Mormon survey, only 14% of Latter-day Saint respondents put gambling in the morally acceptable category, with 56% saying it was morally wrong and 30% considering it not a moral issue. A majority then agreed with the church's position that gambling is immoral. The 2022 to 23 NMS2, by contrast, showed 19% saying it is morally acceptable, 44% calling it morally wrong, and 37% not seeing it as a moral issue. So the share of those who believe gambling to be immoral dropped by 12 points. Those points are nearly evenly distributed between those who think gambling is moral and those who don't consider it a moral issue. She then talks about the reasons why this could be happening. The most interesting one to me was the following, where she says, "But there's another possible interpretation, and it's the exact opposite of the secularization thesis, which is that in this matter, as in many others, Latter-day Saints are playing follow the leader. By this, I mean that even though the church's anti-gambling policy has not changed and is clearly posted on its website, it hasn't been emphasized for a long time. As a general conference topic, the high points of gambling or betting being mentioned were in the 1940s and 50s, and again in the 1990s. That corresponds well to times when gambling was very much in the news, in the mid-century period because of a string of gambling scandals, and in the 1990s and early 2000s because of the growing trend of state legalizations and riverboat casinos. In the 1990s and 2000s, gambling was mentioned 42 times in General Conference. In the 2010s and so far in the 2020s, it's only come up 6 times. Personal interjection here. To me, this sounds a whole lot like a church that bases its General Conference talks on social trends instead of revelation. Back to Jana. Given that reality, it's possible that some younger members of the church don't even know about the church's long-standing opposition to gambling, or whether something like betting on the Super Bowl would count. Sorry to be a literal spoil sport, Jana says, but it does. Section 38.8.17 of the church's handbook specifies that its opposition includes sports betting and government-sponsored lotteries. There goes your Super Bowl loophole. Now let's read a little from the Salt Lake Tribune, where it says, "It takes no stances on policies or candidates. It submits no amicus briefs on weighty and divisive legal causes. It has no job placement program. No matter. In the 40-plus years since its founding, the Federalist Society has managed to reshape American jurisprudence, and thus American life, by injecting into the legal mainstream ideas once championed by only a few conservative and libertarian voices. Chief among them is originalism, a belief that the Constitution and other legal texts should be interpreted as they were understood at the time of their adoption." You know, that reminds me of people who are still active believing Mormons, but think that the church needs to go back to the same way it was when Joseph Smith was a prophet. Back to the article. The argument was central, for example, in the 2022 Supreme Court ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade and ended the constitutional right to an abortion. And now, for the first time in the Federalist Society's history, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is serving as its president and CEO. Born in Utah and raised in Idaho, Sheldon Gilbert is the father of 4 children, all named after presidents, and a former missionary who never leaves home without a copy of the Constitution in his pocket, usually more than one in case I need to share. You know, if he was a really good former missionary, he would have a Book of Mormon as well, but the article does not say whether or not he does. He is also, as his former law professor and colleague Jeffrey Rosen put it, the opposite of MAGA. Jeffrey Rosen stresses that Gilbert is not a political partisan, but someone committed to open dialogue and debate. To be clear, Rosen, president and CEO of the National Constitution Center, quickly added, "The University of Utah alum is not a partisan Democrat either, or," he continued, "a partisan of any kind." Indeed, Gilbert's new position has excited a politically diverse set of friends, colleagues, and former classmates who view his ascendance as a signal that the organization is choosing to actively divest from polarization. His appointment is a radical act of faith by the Federalist Society, Rosen said, in the importance of debate and dialogue. I'm actually going to have to read more and study about this. I have never been intensely versed on political matters, but because of the current state of the country, I'm attempting to be more informed, which is why, along with the Mormon connection, I wanted to share this information with you. Please feel free to leave any thoughts you have about it in the comments. Now I want to tell a brief little story about something that happened yesterday. I went to my Google search bar and typed in Jeffrey Holland, NDE, because I was looking for information about his near-death experience. Well, Google had a mind of its own and auto-corrected NDE by adding a U after the N, which I didn't notice until after I hit return and was suddenly looking at some interesting photos of a guy who calls himself Jeffrey Holland and takes images and videos, including scenes that mirror what happens to the veil in the temple, minus all of the clothing. I may have laughed a lot. I luckily didn't have to feel any shame about the encounter. Mr. Jeffrey Holland is allowed to keep doing his thing. And on that note, let's finish with this graphic with the following caption. Mormons are #1 in sexual shame, according to research by Darrell Ray in his book, Sex and God. So if you're wondering if it really was/is that bad, the answer is yes. It was the worst. Fortunately, a later chart shows ex-Mormons and ex-Jehovah Witnesses have the most changed sex lives upon leaving. It gets better. And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.